The first time Eleanor heard her father humming that strange melody, she thought it was just another ghost from his fading mind. The note spilled from his lips like a secret trying to remember itself, haunting, broken, incomplete. There was something in the way he lingered on the last line, as if afraid it might disappear if sung too loud. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now drifted toward a window that no longer showed anything but memories. He repeated the tune every morning, like a ritual he didn't know he was performing, and each time it felt more urgent. It wasn't one of his jingles from his advertising days. She knew them all by heart. This one had something else in it, something deeper, something buried. What if the people we love most carry songs inside them we were never meant to hear? And what if, just once, we get the chance to hear it, but don't recognize it for what it is? Eleanor had spent years wishing for some final thread of connection with her father as Alzheimer's carved away the man he used to be. And now, she began to wonder if the melody was that thread, fragile, unraveling, but still real. Maybe we never truly lose someone. Maybe, piece by piece, they come back in ways we least expect, through sounds, scents, stories half told. Or maybe some songs are so full of truth, they survive even when memory forgets how to carry them. Her father, Charles Whitmore, had been many things: composer, father, husband, and in the world of catchy 1980s TV commercials, a minor legend. But none of his fame prepared Eleanor for what she was about to find. She had come home to clean out the attic, not to chase shadows. Yet the moment she stumbled across the worn-out cassette tapes tucked inside a shoebox labeled "Private," her breath hitched. There were no labels, no dates, only silence, dust, and a sharp cold that had nothing to do with temperature. One tape in particular seemed newer than the rest, its plastic still smooth, untouched by time. And when she pressed play, the room changed. A woman's voice, raw, pure, singing the same melody Charles had been humming. The lyrics were fractured, but the emotion undeniable. It wasn't a demo, it wasn't a jingle, it was a confession. Eleanor sat frozen, eyes wide, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm. She had never heard this voice before, and yet it stirred something deeply familiar, as if the woman was singing directly to her, across decades, across secrets, across blood. The melody ended abruptly, as if cut off mid-truth. Eleanor rewound the tape and listened again, and again. Each time it felt closer to something, not just a song, but a message. Her father hadn't hummed this tune for no reason, and whoever the woman was, she hadn't sung it just for him. There was longing in her voice, yes, but also rage, defiance, the kind of power that gets buried because the world doesn't know what to do with it. Eleanor realized then that this wasn't just a lost song. It was a map. She needed to know who that woman was. The next morning, she confronted her father gently, asking if he remembered a name. Any name? His gaze drifted again, caught somewhere between recognition and fog. But when she hummed the first few notes of the melody, a tear slipped down his cheek. He reached for her hand, squeezed it harder than he had in months, and whispered one word, "Delilah," then nothing more. The name hit her like a wind through an open door. Eleanor had never heard it mentioned in family stories. Her mother, long gone from their lives, had died when Eleanor was 5. All she knew was what others told her: elegant, kind, gentle. But there was never mention of Delilah. Who was she? A lover? A muse? Someone forgotten? Eleanor's skin tingled with questions. She dug through her father's archives, like an archaeologist unearthing forbidden truths. Old reels, notebooks, torn pages. In one journal, hidden beneath an advertisement storyboard, she found the lyrics to the full song, scribbled in his precise handwriting. But it wasn't titled Delilah. At the top, in fading ink, were 4 words, for the voice they silenced. Eleanor took the lyrics to a friend of her father's, Marcus Lane, a former sound engineer who had worked with Charles during the height of his career. At first, he waved her off. "Memory isn't a tape recorder," he said. But when she played the recording, his face lost color. "You shouldn't have found that," he muttered. That song was never meant to be heard again. She pressed him, and what he said next made her breath catch. Delilah Monroe. She was a singer, black, brilliant, and completely erased. Charles loved her once. They tried to record something together, but the studio, the network, they didn't want her voice anywhere near his brand. It was the 70s. Things were uglier than people like to remember. Her heart dropped. She had grown up in a house built by melodies, yet one voice had been banished from all of them. Why would he keep the tape, she asked. Marcus shook his head. Because guilt has a better memory than love. He couldn't let her go, but he couldn't save her either. Eleanor left that day with a knot in her stomach. Her father had built his legacy on sounds that sold products. Meanwhile, the most powerful thing he ever helped create had been silenced. She wondered what her mother knew. Had she known about Delilah? Had she resented the silence or helped enforce it? Back home, Eleanor sat beside her father again. She hummed the melody. He closed his eyes, mouthing words that no longer made sense, but the feeling remained. She showed him the notebook, the lyrics. He stared at them, then at her, and for a fleeting second, something clicked. "You have her eyes," he whispered. Eleanor's chest tightened. Her mother's eyes were blue. Hers were not. She had always looked different from the family, darker hair, different skin tone, questions that had lived quietly in the corners of her identity. Now, they screamed. Could Delilah have been her real mother? The thought burned through her like wildfire. Adoption was never mentioned. Her birth certificate listed her mother as Catherine Whitmore. But what if that had been a cover? What if Delilah had been pushed out of the picture, not just musically, but maternally? She needed answers, real ones. And the song. The song wasn't finished. Eleanor spent the night lying awake with the cassette still playing in her head. The woman's voice, Delilah's voice, moved like wind through an open field, brushing softly against parts of her that had never been touched. She had heard countless recordings in her life, but none like this. It wasn't just music. It was grief folded into melody, resistance soaked in harmony. There was power in the imperfections of her pitch, like a heart breaking in real time. At one point, Eleanor found herself weeping quietly in the dark, not entirely sure who she was crying for, Delilah, her father, or herself. By morning, she was already back on the road. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not Marcus, not the nurse who helped care for her father, not even her own son, David, who called every Sunday like clockwork. The questions were too raw, the answers still buried. She only knew one thing for certain. Somewhere, there had to be someone else who remembered Delilah Monroe. Someone who hadn't forgotten. Someone who didn't let the industry erase her. Charles had kept dozens of journals over the years, many of them meticulous, set lists, client notes, and scribbled conversations with producers. In one of the older ones, Eleanor had found a faint name scribbled in the margin beneath a coffee stain. Reggie T. Drums. A musician? A bandmate? A lead? It wasn't much, but it was enough. She searched for the name online, filtering through jazz forums, old fan pages, and a dusty Facebook profile photo of an elderly black man standing next to a drum kit. His bio read, "Still tapping out truth, one beat at a time," she messaged him. The reply came faster than she expected. "Delilah? Haven't heard that name in decades. Where did you get that tape?" Eleanor's fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure how much to reveal. But then she typed, "My father was Charles Whitmore. He kept a recording of her. I believe she may have been more than just a singer to him." There was no response for over an hour. Then a phone number appeared and a single line, "Call me tonight." She called just after sunset. Reggie's voice came through the line, rough but steady, like someone who'd lived through things and stopped pretending otherwise. "You're Charles's daughter," he said, not as a question, but a quiet observation. "He never forgave himself, you know." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "What happened to her?" she asked. Reggie paused. She could hear the faint creak of a chair on the other end. "What didn't happen?" he murmured. "The label dropped her. The radio stations turned her down. But it wasn't the silence that killed her. It was the erasure." He explained how Delilah had come up through the underground circuit, basement clubs, smoky lounges, protest rallies. Her voice wasn't just soulful. It was dangerous to the people who feared what it could awaken. She had been fearless, singing about things most women were told to whisper, and then she fell in love. Charles thought he could protect her, Reggie said, But love without courage is like a melody with no rhythm. It can't carry anyone. When Delilah's final recording session was canceled, she vanished from the scene. No one knew where she went. She didn't die, Reggie said, at least not in the way the industry pretended, but she was lost, like a song stuck between radio frequencies. The next morning, Eleanor drove 3 hours to meet Reggie in person. He lived in a modest brick house just outside Detroit, surrounded by faded posters of shows from another era. He opened the door with a cane in one hand and an unmistakable sadness in his eyes, but when he saw Eleanor, his jaw clenched ever so slightly. "You look like her," he said. "Not Catherine, Delilah." Inside, he showed her old photographs, black and white prints of Delilah with her signature head wrap, laughing beside a piano, holding a notebook filled with lyrics. "She wrote a lot," Reggie said. "Poetry, mostly. Stuff that never got recorded." He handed Eleanor a worn folder with her name on it, written in blue ink. "Your father must have given her this. She always kept everything he touched. I didn't realize she left it behind when she left town. Maybe she meant for you to find it." Inside the folder were handwritten letters, dozens of them, most unsigned, some torn, others written in a rushed, emotional scrawl. Eleanor read through them slowly. One line made her hands tremble. "If anything happens, promise me she won't grow up ashamed of where she came from." Another, "I hear your voice in her heartbeat." The puzzle pieces rearranged themselves in real time. Eleanor was no longer wondering if she might be Delilah's daughter. She knew it now, and every breath she took after that felt both heavier and clearer. Back at home, she confronted Charles again, this time with the letters, the notebook, the truth. His eyes were vacant at first, flickering like dying bulbs in an old house. But then, for a moment, they focused. He touched the page, whispered her name, Delilah. "I loved her." Eleanor knelt beside him, clutching his hand. "Why did you let them take her away?" she asked. He blinked slowly. "They said it would ruin everything. The campaign, the image. They said no one would buy soap from a man who had a black child." His voice cracked. "I didn't fight hard enough." There was no rage in her heart, only sorrow, the kind that sits between generations, passed down like untuned instruments. Eleanor realized then that the wound she had always carried, the invisible distance between who she was and where she came from, had a name, a face, a song. That evening, Eleanor took the recording to a friend who ran a small studio downtown. She wanted to finish what Delilah started. Using the original tape and the lyrics found in the notebook, they reconstructed the song. Eleanor, despite never having sung publicly, recorded the missing verses herself, her voice uncertain, trembling, but deeply connected to the woman she never knew. The final result was haunting and tender. A duet across time, a daughter singing beside the mother she never got to hold. They uploaded the track anonymously to a public archive dedicated to lost voices of American soul. Within days, it spread. Older listeners recognized the voice from dim clubs and forgotten nights. Musicians commented in disbelief. Historians asked where the tape had been hidden all this time. No one knew who uploaded it, but the song lived again. It reached Marcus, who called Eleanor in tears. "You gave her justice," he said. "That's more than any of us did back then." And it reached someone else, too. Late one evening, Eleanor received a letter, no name on the envelope. Inside was a short note. "I knew Delilah. I knew her better than anyone. She didn't just disappear, she was taken." Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the page. At the bottom, a name, Loretta Haynes. She had no idea who Loretta was, but the letter had a return address in Philadelphia. Something inside her stirred again, the same whisper that had pulled her toward the tape, toward the truth. Whatever story remained unfinished, it was waiting there, in the next city, in the voice of a woman who hadn't forgotten. She packed a small bag, kissed her father's forehead, and left before dawn. The roads were empty, the sky still dark, but inside her something had shifted. Delilah was no longer just a song. She was a woman, a mother, and perhaps still someone's unfinished story. The streets of Philadelphia were slick with morning dew as Eleanor stepped off the train and into the unknown. She carried nothing but a small duffel, her father's notebook, and a copy of the tape tucked into a padded envelope. The city hummed softly, unaware of what it held. She had rehearsed what she might say to Loretta Haynes, but no words felt right. How do you approach someone who knows your mother better than you ever could? What questions do you ask when you're not sure your heart is ready to hear the answers? Loretta lived in a narrow brick townhouse with ivy creeping along the windowsills. Eleanor rang the doorbell and waited, her fingers trembling despite the warmth in the air. When the door opened, an older woman stood behind it, tall and sharp-eyed, with silver curls and a presence that immediately silenced the world around her. "You're her," Loretta said without needing a name. "Come in." The house smelled of paper and jasmine tea. Inside, walls were lined with framed photographs of black artists, singers, and writers, most of whom Eleanor didn't recognize, though something about their faces felt familiar. In the corner of the room stood an upright piano, its surface worn from decades of use. Loretta poured tea into mismatched cups and placed one in Eleanor's hands before sitting across from her. There was a long silence, full but not heavy. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but deliberate. "I saw the upload. I listened 3 times, once for Delilah, once for myself, and once for what could have been." Eleanor barely breathed. "You said she didn't disappear." "She didn't," Loretta said. "She was erased, and not just by the men in suits or the stations or the labels. She was betrayed by someone close, someone she trusted." Her fingers tapped the rim of her teacup. Delilah wasn't just a singer child, she was an activist. The label wanted to turn her into a product, something safe and pretty. But she was born to rattle cages. That's why they couldn't let her keep her voice. Eleanor leaned forward. "Do you know who took her?" Loretta hesitated, then stood. She walked to a drawer near the piano and pulled out a thin file. Inside were police reports, newspaper clippings, and a handwritten letter with Delilah's name signed at the bottom. They said she vanished, but she wrote to me 3 days before that, said she was going to confront someone who told her they'd make her career disappear if she didn't walk away from Charles. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Who?" Loretta looked her dead in the eye. "Raymond Caldwell, executive producer at Carver & King Records. He ran most of Charles' big campaigns. He had pull everywhere. He's the reason Delilah's name never showed up in liner notes even when she wrote the lyrics. He threatened her. And when she didn't back down, she was gone." A chill ran through Eleanor. "Do you think he had her killed?" "I think," Loretta said, "that when you hold a match too long, the fire doesn't just go out, it burns back." She handed Eleanor the last letter Delilah ever wrote. The handwriting was jagged, as if written in a rush. "If I disappear, know that I didn't walk away. Someone closed the door behind me, but doors swing both ways. One day someone will open it again, someone with my blood." Eleanor didn't cry, not yet. The grief was too large for tears. Instead, she folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bag. That night, in a small motel room just outside the city, she couldn't sleep. The lights from the street painted gold slashes on the ceiling. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the bed, the letter in one hand and her phone in the other. She searched for Raymond Caldwell. He was still alive, retired, living in a gated community in Virginia. Her pulse surged. She didn't know what she was planning, only that she had to see him. She arrived unannounced, standing outside the manicured white fence like a storm waiting to be acknowledged. The security guard tried to turn her away, but a woman in her 60s came walking by, heard Eleanor mention Delilah's name, and froze. "You knew Delilah Monroe?" the woman asked. Eleanor nodded. The woman looked over her shoulder, then back at Eleanor. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, a staff member handed Eleanor a card with a private address scribbled on the back. "He doesn't like visitors, but if you're brave enough to knock, I won't stop you." She drove in silence, the road winding through quiet hills. The house was large, elegant, empty in the way that only the homes of powerful old men can be. When she rang the bell, there was no response. She rang again. Then the door creaked open. An elderly man in a cardigan stood behind it, his eyes tired but alert. "I know who you are," he said. "You look just like her." Eleanor stepped inside without asking permission. The air was thick with stale wealth and regret. Raymond poured himself a drink and sat in a leather chair that looked older than she was. "So," he said, "you want the truth. I want to know what happened to my mother." Raymond took a sip. She was a storm, beautiful, uncontrolled. She scared men like me, not because she was angry, but because she was honest. He paused. I didn't kill her, if that's what you came to hear. But I made it easy for others to pretend she didn't matter. He explained how, after Delilah refused to sign a contract that would limit her creative control, he pulled every string he had to make her unmarketable. No radio, no venue, no press. She became a ghost long before she disappeared, he said. And Charles, he begged me to stop. He even offered to step away from his own career, but I knew he wouldn't go through with it. He had a daughter, a wife, a legacy. Eleanor stared at him. You made her choose between her voice and her life. He looked away. She didn't choose either. She vanished. Eleanor stood. She didn't vanish. You made sure no one came looking. He didn't respond. On the drive back, Eleanor felt something break open in her chest. Not grief, not rage, something older, the ache of a lineage unspoken. She remembered sitting on her father's lap as a child, asking why her skin was darker than his, why her hair curled in ways her mother's never did. He'd always smiled and said, "That's just the magic in you." Now she understood what he couldn't say. Not then, not ever. When she returned home, she went straight to her father. He was sitting by the window, humming again. She placed the letter in his lap and waited. His fingers touched the paper, traced the edges, then settled. I failed her, he whispered. I thought protecting you meant hiding her. Eleanor knelt beside him. You don't have to hide her anymore. She opened her laptop and played the final version of the song, her voice and Delilah's interwoven like a bridge between broken decades. Charles listened, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. In that moment, something shifted in the room, as if the walls had been holding their breath for too long. And somewhere, Eleanor imagined, Delilah finally exhaled. The next few weeks moved slowly, like water warming on a stove, quiet until it begins to boil. Eleanor stayed close to her father, playing the song for him each morning. Sometimes he'd smile, sometimes he'd cry, but most days he just listened, his hands twitching slightly in rhythm. The music had become their only common language. Words often failed them now, but the melody held them both like a thread too stubborn to break. The more she listened to Delilah's voice, the more she felt her presence, not just in the song, but in herself. Her movements, her quiet defiance, the way she spoke with weight, even in silence. She'd spent her whole life trying to feel at home in rooms where she looked like the exception. Now she began to understand why. It wasn't discomfort, it was inheritance. One morning, while going through another of her father's old boxes, Eleanor found something that made her heart stop. Tucked between torn sheet music and expired contracts was a faded birth certificate, hers, but this version looked different. The mother's name was handwritten, Delilah Monroe, no official stamp, no doctor's signature, just ink, time-worn and brave. And in the corner, in Charles's familiar scrawl, she has her fire. She sat on the floor with it in her lap, her fingers trembling as they traced the lines. This wasn't a legal document, it was a confession. That night, she called her son David. "Mom?" he answered. On the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Everything okay?" Eleanor hesitated. "Do you remember the lullaby I used to sing you when you were little?" He chuckled. "The one with the hum that always made me fall asleep?" "Yeah, why?" "That song wasn't mine," she said softly. "It belonged to your grandmother, a woman I never knew, a woman who loved with her whole voice." David didn't say anything at first. Then, "Tell me everything." She told him about Delilah, about the tape, about the discovery, about Loretta and Raymond, and the truth that had waited decades to surface. David listened, quiet and patient, then asked, "So what now?" "I think I need to find where she went. After everything, I need to know if she lived, if she's buried somewhere, or if somehow she made it out." David paused. "Can I come?" The question made Eleanor's throat catch. Her son, now in his 30s, lived in another city, another life. He had never shown much interest in family history, but now something had shifted. A bridge forming between them, music and blood. They met 3 days later in Chicago, where Delilah had last been seen, according to a forgotten police record Loretta had kept. The city greeted them with wind and steel, the smell of coffee and old train oil. David carried a notebook and a small recorder, ready to document anything they found. Eleanor carried Delilah's letters and the unofficial birth certificate, now worn from being folded and refolded 100 times. Their first stop was the old studio where Delilah once recorded backup vocals, Riverstone Sound. It had long since been converted into an office building, but an older janitor named Floyd remembered the original name. "Yeah, I worked here back in the day," he said, squinting at the ceiling. "Lots of soul passed through them doors. You say her name was Delilah Monroe?" Eleanor nodded, holding up a photo. Floyd stared for a long moment, then whistled low. She was something, fire in her voice. There was talk she was making her own label. Said she was tired of begging to be heard. Did she ever come back after she disappeared? Floyd scratched his head. Not to hear. But I heard she used to visit a church on the south side, not for religion, for the choir. Said they reminded her of freedom. They followed the lead to a small worn-down church with chipped paint and open windows. The pastor, Reverend Simmons, had never met Delilah, but the choir director, Miss Bessie, had. A tall woman with deep laugh lines and a sharp wit. Bessie invited them into the choir room and closed the door behind them. She came here a few times, quiet, wore a scarf over her face, but when she sang, Lord, the walls would shake. Bessie smiled, but her eyes glistened. She didn't want attention, said she just needed to hear voices that hadn't been filtered. Did she tell you where she was staying? Eleanor asked. Bessie hesitated. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out an old Polaroid. In it, Delilah stood with the choir, smiling, her arm around a young girl with thick curls and a gap-toothed grin. That's my niece, Toni, Bessie said. Delilah loved that child. Eleanor's voice shook. Is she still around? Bessie nodded. She lives in Hyde Park, works at the public library. They went the next morning. The library was warm and quiet, the kind of place where time softened. Behind the circulation desk, a woman in her 40s sat typing. Her eyes lifted as they approached, and when Eleanor showed her the Polaroid, she gasped softly. I haven't seen this in years, Toni said, holding the photo to her chest. She used to bring me records, old jazz, protest soul, told me never to sing for someone who didn't want me to speak. Do you know what happened to her? Eleanor asked. Toni took a deep breath. She left. Went to Georgia, I think. Said she wanted to disappear the right way this time. Not because they told her to, but because she chose it. Georgia? David asked. Savannah, near the coast. There was a place she mentioned, a boarding house for women who needed to start over, run by a woman named Ruth. That night, Eleanor sat in the hotel room, staring at the ocean on the screensaver of her laptop. She thought about the idea of disappearing on purpose, of erasing yourself before the world could do it for you. Was that what Delilah had done? Or had she hoped, somewhere deep down, that someone would come looking? She turned to David, who had fallen asleep on the other bed, notebook still open on his chest. Her son, the next generation, the part of Delilah that would live even longer than her song. And she knew they had to go to Georgia. Savannah smelled like rain and magnolia. The streets were still damp when Eleanor and David arrived, the trees above them dripping slow and steady like time melting. They didn't speak much on the ride in. Everything that needed to be said hung between them, delicate as wet thread. The boarding house wasn't hard to find. It stood on the edge of a quiet street, white shutters, peeling green paint, a porch swing swaying with no wind. A brass plaque near the door read, "The Ruth Home for Women Starting Over." David glanced at his mother. Do you think she's still here? Eleanor didn't answer. She just knocked. A woman in her 70s opened the door. Her hair was silver and thick, pulled into a loose bun. She wore a faded blue dress and had eyes that could cut through fog. You're looking for Delilah, she said, not as a question, but as a certainty. Eleanor's chest tightened. How did you know? The woman stepped aside. Because I never believed no one would come. Her name was Ruth Collins. She led them into a sitting room that smelled faintly of rosewater and old books. Eleanor could feel the house breathing, each floorboard creaking like a whisper from long ago. Ruth sat in a wicker chair and folded her hands. Delilah came here in the spring of '81, thin as rain, eyes like fire and ash. She didn't ask for help. She asked for silence. Eleanor leaned forward. She stayed here? For almost a year, Ruth said. didn't talk much about the past, but I heard her humming, always humming, at night, when she thought no one was listening. Songs I never heard on the radio. Beautiful ones, broken ones. David pulled out the tape recorder. Do you remember where she went after? Ruth looked away. She got sick, cancer. She didn't tell anyone until it was too late, wouldn't go to a hospital. Said she didn't trust places built to forget women like her. Eleanor swallowed hard. Did she die here? Ruth nodded. Upstairs, room 3. I sat with her the night she passed. She asked me not to call anyone. Said her voice had lived long enough, but she gave me this. Ruth reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with time. She said, "One day someone will knock on this door who sounds like me. Give this to them." Eleanor took the envelope with both hands. Her fingers were trembling. Inside was a photo. Delilah holding a newborn baby, wrapped in a patterned cloth. Her eyes were tired, but fierce. On the back, in elegant script, "Her name is Eleanor. Don't let them make her small." Below the photo was a folded sheet of paper, a song, untitled, unfinished, 2 verses, a chorus, and one final line scrawled beneath it, barely legible. "Sing it only when you're ready to become whole." The weight of it was unbearable and beautiful. Eleanor held the photo against her chest, her body shaking with something beyond grief. It was recognition. That picture wasn't just a memory, it was proof that she had been seen, even when hidden, loved, even when erased. Upstairs, room 3 was empty now. A small bed, lace curtains, a bookshelf with 3 volumes of poetry, and one worn Bible. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The world beyond was unchanged, but inside her, everything was different. David stood in the doorway, quiet. "She knew you'd come." "She didn't want to be found," Eleanor said softly. "Maybe not by the world," he replied, "but she left a trail for you." Now, nurse, they stayed in Savannah for 2 more days. Ruth gave them everything Delilah had left behind. A scarf, a notebook filled with poems, a tiny cassette with a few minutes of humming and laughter, recorded without intention. Eleanor listened to it a dozen times, memorizing the cadence of her mother's joy. Back home, Charles had grown weaker. The nurse said he barely ate. His hands trembled constantly now. But when Eleanor played him the new recording, Delilah's final hums, her voice without performance, he opened his eyes. "That's her," he whispered. "Yes," Eleanor said, tears running freely. "That's her." He tried to say more, but the words wouldn't come. So she sang to him instead, the last song, her mother's lyrics, her own voice, trembling and strong. And for a moment Charles smiled. Then he closed his eyes and didn't open them again. The funeral was small. Eleanor didn't invite many people, just David, Marcus, Loretta, and a few old friends from the music world. She didn't speak about the commercials or the awards. She spoke about the man who remembered a song when everything else was gone. After the service, Marcus handed her an old reel. "He recorded something," he said. "Back in '79. I didn't even know it existed until I cleaned out the studio. It's not like his other stuff." Eleanor brought it home and set it up with an old reel-to-reel player. The tape hissed. Then came Charles's voice, softer, slower, raw. "I don't know who will hear this. Maybe no one, maybe her, maybe the girl I never got to hold. But this is the truth. I was afraid they'd erase her. So I erased her myself. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I couldn't bear to see her broken. That's not love. I know that now." The tape ended with silence. Eleanor sat for a long time, staring at nothing. Then she stood, picked up the last lyrics Delilah had written, and began to write the rest. Eleanor didn't return to work. She didn't answer messages for days. The world moved around her, but she stayed still, like the center of a turning carousel. There was too much inside her now to pretend life hadn't changed. Too many songs unwritten, too many silences now full of sound. She spent mornings sitting by the window where her father used to hum. The space felt both empty and sacred. David stayed a little longer than he had planned. They cooked together in the evenings, played records Delilah might have listened to, and walked in quiet around the neighborhood. He was different now, softer, less removed, as if some invisible weight had shifted off his shoulders too. One night, while drinking tea at the kitchen table, he said, "She gave you your voice." Eleanor looked at him. "She gave it to both of us. She hadn't planned to return to music, but the grief needed somewhere to go, and the song wouldn't let her sleep. Not the one Delilah started, not the one Charles tried to explain, not the one Ruth gave her with that trembling photograph. These weren't just melodies. They were lifeline, threads of identity that had survived time, silence, and the cowardice of men. She reached out to Marcus, asked him if the studio was still standing. It was. He met her there 2 days later. Everything smelled the same. Old velvet, dust on wood, ghosts in the corners. Eleanor brought Delilah's final lyrics, Charles's confession tape, and the reel of her own humming, imperfect but honest. She stood behind the microphone, closed her eyes, and let the story tell itself. She didn't try to sound like her mother. She didn't try to sound like anyone. She just let go. Marcus layered the original recordings underneath her voice, Delilah's hums, Charles's piano, bits of tape hiss, and whispering strings. The song unfolded like a letter written between generations, passed hand to hand through time. When it was done, they didn't speak. They just sat in the silence it left behind. Eleanor titled the song, "The Fire She Left Me." They released it anonymously. Again, no marketing, no interviews, just uploaded it to the same Lost Voices archive with a single caption, "Not every silence is empty." The response was quiet at first, a few comments, a repost or two, then something shifted. A thread on an online forum asking, "Is this a follow-up to the Delilah Monroe track?" Musicians began dissecting it. Old DJs from the protest era claimed they recognized her tone. Young women said it reminded them of a voice they never knew they were missing. It spread, not like a fire, but like a memory returning. One afternoon, Eleanor received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a folded sheet of paper, inside an envelope sealed with wax. The handwriting was elegant. On the page, "My mother played Delilah's music in secret. I grew up believing soul wasn't just a sound, like it was an inheritance. Thank you for reminding me I wasn't wrong." Below it, no name. Just the initials MD. Eleanor closed her eyes and smiled. The story had moved beyond her now, beyond Charles, beyond Savannah and Chicago and forgotten basements and erased contracts. It had taken root where it always belonged, in the quiet rooms where truth is finally allowed to be heard. That fall, Eleanor was invited to speak at a small independent music school. They didn't know who she really was, only that she had helped revive the work of a lost voice. She stood in front of a classroom of young artists, her hands resting on a worn notebook filled with lyrics passed down like a will. "I used to believe some songs were never meant to be heard," she told them, "that the world decides what deserves an audience. But the truth is, songs aren't waiting for the world. They're waiting for us to be ready, to be brave, to stop running from what hurts, and finally, sing." In the back row, a young woman raised her hand. "How do you know if the song is yours to finish?" Eleanor smiled gently. "If it won't let you sleep, it probably already is." Afterward, several students approached her, asking to see the original lyrics. She shared copies. One of them, a tall girl with box braids and tear-streaked cheeks, said, "This sounds like my grandmother," but she never recorded anything. She was told her voice wasn't marketable. Eleanor looked at her. She was lied to. Back home, Eleanor created a foundation with the money left from Charles's estate. It was called the Fire Project, and it was built to find, restore, and share the songs that had been silenced, especially by women, by Black artists, by those pushed to the margins. David helped design the archive. Tony from Chicago volunteered to organize community sessions. Ruth donated Delilah's notebooks to the collection, and Loretta, fierce, sharp Loretta, sent a one-line blessing. Now they'll hear her, every damn note. Some nights, Eleanor still played the tape, not because she needed to hear it again, but because it reminded her of something quiet and extraordinary, that her mother never truly disappeared. She just waited for the world to become brave enough to listen. There was a moment, days after the Fire Project went live, when Eleanor found herself sitting in complete silence. No music, no humming, no voices from old tapes, just the slow creak of her home breathing around her. And in that silence, for the first time, she didn't feel hollow. She felt full. The pain hadn't left. The ache for the mother she never knew, the father she lost in fragments, the questions that never got full answers. But something had changed. The grief had found shape. And when pain takes form, it becomes something you can hold, something you can understand, something that no longer owns you. Letters started arriving from all parts of the country, some typed, others handwritten in shaking script. Most came from people Eleanor had never met. Women in their 70s and 80s who had once sung backup in basements, played piano in living rooms, led choirs that were never recorded. One woman wrote, "I always thought my songs died with me. Turns out they were just waiting for someone like you." David compiled the letters into a book, not for sale, just for memory. They called it Unforgotten. Each page was a voice that had once been quiet. Now it sang again. Months passed, the foundation grew. Schools started requesting workshops. Small-town libraries requested copies of Delilah's lyrics. Younger musicians offered to volunteer time to record demos. For elder artists, Eleanor oversaw it all with calm care. She didn't want fame. She wanted resonance. One afternoon, while organizing some files at the archive, she received a message from Marcus. "Check your inbox," it said. Inside was a link, no subject line, no explanation. She clicked. It was video footage, grainy, black and white. A private studio session, dated March 1981. The screen showed Delilah, seated at a piano, hair wrapped in a scarf, eyes locked on the keys. Her fingers danced lightly. The room was silent except for the microphone testing levels. Then she spoke. "If this gets used, I want it played the way it was recorded. No edits, no polish, just truth." She took a breath, looked into the lens, and smiled. And then she sang. It wasn't the song Eleanor had heard before. It was something else. A lullaby. Simple, delicate. A love letter to a daughter she knew she'd never raise. In the final line, her voice cracked slightly. "One day, she'll hear me in her sleep and know she came from fire." Eleanor pressed pause. Her hands covered her mouth. She couldn't breathe. Later that evening, she played the video for David. He didn't say a word for several minutes after it ended. Then, quietly, "She knew you'd hear it one day." Eleanor nodded, "And now the whole world will." They released the footage exactly as Delilah had asked. No edits, no color correction, no studio enhancements. The upload title was simple: Delilah Monroe, One Day, Unreleased. The internet lit up. Older black musicians and forgotten names from vinyl sleeves commented with disbelief. "I played behind her once in '78. She helped me write my first lyric and told me never to beg for permission. I thought this voice was lost forever." Eleanor didn't answer the comments. She just read them, cried sometimes, smiled others, because that's what this had always been about: recognition, truth, legacy. One evening, as the sun began to set through her living room window, casting warm orange light across the floorboards, Eleanor sat by the record player. In her hands, she held the final acetate, a special pressing of the completed song, the last one she recorded with Marcus. On the cover, a photo of Delilah smiling, not performing, just smiling. She placed the record on. The song began. Halfway through, she closed her eyes. She imagined Delilah sitting across from her, not as a ghost, not as a mystery, just her mother, real, laughing, breathing, humming softly, their voices overlapping like a promise kept too long. And for the first time in Eleanor's life, she felt complete. Not whole because the wounds had healed, whole because they had finally been seen. Across town, in a small venue built inside a converted church, a young singer was performing a tribute night to voices that once burned. She closed the set with Delilah's unfinished song, the one Eleanor had completed. As she sang the final verse, she looked out at the crowd of graying faces, leaning forward with wet eyes and hands clasped tight. The past, alive in the voice of the present. And in the very last row, Eleanor sat, quiet, grateful, more than anything, proud. Outside, the wind carried the melody down empty streets. Maybe someone passing by heard it. Maybe they stopped and wondered who it belonged to. Maybe, without knowing why, they smiled. And maybe that was enough. Did you enjoy this story? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notification. Enjoy and comment below about your experience listening to this story.